Ayaan Hirsi Ali, welcome to the show.
Alex, thank you very much for having me.
It's been an incredible year for you, coming out as a Christian, dealing with the reactions and criticisms as a result of that. My first question is, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
I hope so. How is your life different from a year ago when you'd become a Christian, but you were getting ready to talk about it? It wasn't part of your public persona yet. How has life changed for you?
Well, I think I was troubled in my heart, in my head, and I'm in a place of peace. I'm at peace with what I do, with where I am, with my work, with my family, and it's something new for me. So sometimes there's this sense that it will just disappear and I'll go back to that time of confusion and trouble. But it's permanent. It feels permanent. It feels more permanent. And in fact, every day I feel more and more attached. I'll say attached and connected to God. And that connection then gives me a much stronger connection with everything else, with my family and friends and relations and my work.
Has the way you feel about Christianity changed since publicizing the Christianity that you have? Has that changed the way that you approach it? I imagine that there are a lot of people trying to help you determine which denomination you might be or iron out some of the intricacies of your theology. How has it been since actually coming out, as it were?
Well, I have to always bear in mind, and I think maybe there's an advantage to coming to Christianity as an older person, is that you keep telling yourself there is Christ and his teachings and the gospel and the Bible, and then there are the followers of Christ who are humans, and they see things differently and they experience things differently. And so, yes, I do get all these invitations of people saying, join my denomination, it's better than the other one. And here's why it's better than the other one. I also really get a lot of people who say, I prayed for you for so many years and my prayers have been answered. And of course, my answer is always, Amen. But aside from that, I also get a large number of people who are delighted that people like me who are former atheists and vocal former atheists are coming back and saying there's something of value to religion in general and Christianity in particular. So I get that reaction as well.
And how do you feel about the fact that a lot of people are using your conversion to put a flag in a cultural moment? I mean, such a personal story as yours, which perhaps we can relay to those who don't know, becoming a political tool for so many to say, look at what's happening in the world, look at this former atheist, look at how she's become a Christian, and putting you up on something of a pedestal. How has that been for you?
So I don't like pedestals because I don't think that it's a good way of doing things. Again, my attraction to Christianity is really more of the humility and the meekness and the fact that you're fallible over and over again. You sin, you admit that you're a sinner, and so by so doing, you don't. You try your best not to judge others. But then in terms of people using me, I don't feel used, but I do sense an excitement when it comes to a rekindling of religion, not so much as politics, but the religious foundations of Western society, of America, of course, and then Britain, and in the other places where Christianity was put down, was ridiculed, was likened to Islam and other religions, was called irrational. People who are Christians mocked and called stupid and irrational. And so I find that there's this excitement if someone like me can come back to Christianity and appreciate what it is, aside from even believing in God, just appreciating the outcome of this culture, I think is a big step. And so I don't see it as a political, it may have something political, but it is first and foremost, it's a cultural awakening or reawakening, or maybe a cultural confidence that needs to come back.
How much of your experience in the last few years of coming to Christianity has been a result of cultural considerations, and how much a result of personal considerations, or perhaps even theological considerations? Perhaps you can walk us through what it is that brought you to Christ.
It's personal, completely personal. I was in a place of complete darkness and crisis. I was terrified. I was confused. I was in this depression. I just felt this emptiness and darkness. And I resisted all invitations to spirituality because I thought, that's not me. And even at my darkest moment, when, again, I was talking to one of many therapists who said, perhaps you're spiritually bankrupt and you should try considering doing something about that. And I thought, not me. I left Islam. My associations with the concept of God was a God of punishment and a God of anger and a God in whose name so many terrible things were said and done over centuries. So I wasn't up for that. But I realized that as human beings, we are more than just reason, and that there's more than the material and the rational, and that it's not either or. It's not that you either choose reason or faith. I think you can have both of them if you understand to keep them separate. So it was 100% personal. But then, of course, I don't live in a vacuum. I look around me and I saw similar in many ways. I know my story is unique, but in many ways it's not that unique. There's a great deal of, I'll say, disconnection in our society. And people have left whatever it is that rooted them in their society and in their families and in their communities. And for many in the West, that was Christianity. And so I've come to see that it's not just the personal, but on a community level, even on a civilizational level, the throwing away of Christianity was, I think, what was the saying, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And so you can be like Richard Dawkins, an avowed atheist, and still appreciate the legacy of Christianity and the roots of this culture in Christianity.
As Richard Dawkins does, I just joined him in Oxford as part of his tour for a show, and when I saw him, I told him that I'd been to Evensong the night before, and I said it almost a little bit embarrassed, as if to say, to the world's most famous atheist, I quite like the choir. I went to Evensong last night, and you know what he said? Me too. I just went to a different one at a different college.
Yes.
When you came out as a Christian in Unheard, the principal reaction that I saw from people is that here is an essay that talks about Trump, it talks about Putin, it talks about China, it talks about politics, and mentions the name of Jesus, I think, precisely once, mentions Richard Dawkins, mentions cultural factors, and a lot of people read this essay, Why I Am Now a Christian, and heard essentially a political treatise and thought, is Ayaan a Christian for essentially political reasons disconnected from the truth of the Christian doctrine? Since then, it sounds like your story has been much more personal, but people might still ask the same question. How much of this has to do with you believing that the doctrines of Christianity are true? That's also one of Richard's biggest problems or critiques, is that we're all delighted to see that this has changed your life and transformed you and that you're happy again. Yeah. I mean, that nobody can disagree about that. But people will raise this question mark. Do you believe that it's true? Does that even matter to you?
I believe that it's true, and it matters very much. And I think also I got a deluge of emails and papers all asking the same question, to what degree is this personal? Is this the political masquerading as personal, in addition to the people who were saying, I prayed for you or come to my denomination. No, I believe it. What I will not do, which is, I think, hard for people like Richard, is take my 21st century brain and explain past century events. But I'm reading a lot. I'm reading the Gospels, I'm reading Old Testament, New Testament, I'm reading the apologetics. And a world is opening up for me that in many ways I find so fascinating and enriching. And I will not tell you that I can explain the miracles that took place in the past century. I can't explain them, but I do choose to believe in them. And that's a completely different attitude. And having that faith, faith, as you know, you have faith. There's no. This is, I think, where it's important to separate reason from faith. Is I'm not going to prove it, and you don't need proof. You believe, and so having embarked on that path, I find what I read strengthens that faith more and more each day, and it's a pity. And this is sort of a statement to my fellow atheists, to lead a life of constantly fortifying yourself against faith. And then in that way, you create a counterfaith in non-faith. And you don't allow even a tiny opening, because you're creating these barriers around, you don't allow any. We used to say, one thing I liked about the Enlightenment, and I still do, is don't prejudge. Come, to the table with no preconceived notions about what you're going to hear or see. And that's not what my fellow atheists were doing. They were just really fortifying themselves against ever believing. And they had very solid preconceived notions. And then that in itself became a gospel of its own. And so there is the new atheism. This is what we believe in, versus the people who believe in God. And then again, it has a bit of a tribal element to it, where this is, that's you and that's me.
People listening will think, well, no, atheism is just a disbelief in God. Here's a worldview that's being presented to me and I'm saying I don't believe it. What is, in your view, as formerly one of the most important figures in the new atheist movement, what can you now see as the gospel of new atheism? What is that? What is new atheism's 10 commandments? What does it look like as a worldview?
I think the reason why it was called new atheism was that it had this this evangelizing aspect to it. Because yes, you're right, atheism, or to be an atheist, is simply to take on the attitude of, say, I don't think there's any proof. Convince me. If I see evidence of the existence of God, I might change my mind. So that attitude hardened into something along the lines of, there is no proof. There is no evidence. Therefore, I don't believe in God. And not only that, people who believe in God are wicked, they're dangerous, they're stupid, they're superstitious. And therefore, we must evangelize against them. And I think in hindsight, I'm speaking for myself, that was a very unhealthy attitude to take, because you close off so much.
We'll get back to Ayaan in just a moment. But first, do you trust the news media? I don't. And a lot of that has to do with the bias that inevitably seeps into reporting. One way for us as consumers of media to navigate this space is to analyze media bias, directly comparing headlines and the way that stories are reported across the political spectrum. That is exactly what today's sponsor, Ground News, helps you to do. Ground News aggregates thousands of local and international news outlets in one place, so you can compare the way that the same story is being reported across the political spectrum. You can try it out and get 50% off by going to ground.news/AlexOC. For every story, context is provided. Who owns the various sources? What are their political leanings? How reliable is their reporting? All of this allows you to directly compare how the same story is being warped by media bias. Take a look at this story about Oklahoma's education superintendent attempting to mandate that all students watch a video announcing a new Department of Religious Freedom and Patriotism. I can compare the headlines and see that only some of them mention that in the video Ryan Walters prays for Donald Trump, which is a relevant bit of information. I can also see that of the sources reporting on this story, only only 8% of them are right-leaning. This means if you only read right-leaning news, you could have missed this story altogether. And Ground News has a feature called My News Bias, which is a personal dashboard giving me a detailed look at the news that I'm reading. It shows me which sources I check out the most, their bias, who owns them, and which geographic regions the stories are related to. I think Ground News is the best way to navigate media bias. You can never get rid of bias, but using a tool like Ground News can help you to manage it efficiently. Try it for yourself at ground.news/AlexOC. Use my link to get 50% off their unlimited access Vantage plan. With that said, back to Ayaan. What do you think is the biggest mistake that New Atheism made?
For me, it's the statement that all religions are the same. They are not. I grew up as a Muslim. I'm a Christian now. And they're completely different. So it was a huge mistake to throw them all in one bucket and make this general statement about all religions being the same. Number one. Number two, I think that because of this attitude, religion is, it's superstition, it's untrue, it's unintelligent. I think a false dichotomy was created about, you can either have faith, you can be religious, or you can be a man of reason, but you can't be both. And that, I think, then created even more confusion, especially for young people looking for role models, looking to answer the question, what's the purpose and meaning of life? Why are we here? How do I relate to my fellow human beings? What's the good life? So those are two major ones. And then three, I think the organizing and then trying to mobilize people to choose atheism with both of these points, that I think then all it did was weaken and degenerate belief in Christianity, and it strengthened other religions. It strengthened Islam because it's consistent with what, for instance, members of the Muslim Brotherhood say about Christianity. They say it's false, it's weak, Muhammad is the last word. And so you listen to the atheists and they say they're saying it themselves. And it also opened, I think, the door for other pseudo-religions. Many of us have been discussing what wokeism is. And in many ways it has, I know it is neo-Marxism or it's cultural Marxism as some call it, but it is with religious zeal that some people believe in it and don't question it. And there is this void, this spiritual need that people have, and they found it in wokeism because wokeism insists on justice and young people seeking to do what is right and what's good and what's just now find it in these either false gods or are in fact converting to Islam or are feeling quite frustrated with their own legacy. They've been told Christianity is synonymous with, it's the religion of the white man. And the white man, the white heterosexual man, is an exploiter, a slaveholder, a colonizer. He's awful. And so you can't be Christian, you have to be something else. And I think that in itself has created a lot of, and I think it's unintended, but anxieties, depressions, confusion. And so these are all things that we have to grapple with.
There will have been a time when you believed that religion was not just wrong, but evil, a bad force for the world, wrapped up in this new atheist movement. You've had a personal change in conviction. You've had something speak to you and quite clearly transform you as a person. You said that you've been reading the Gospels, reading the Old Testament. When you come across these verses that you yourself probably would have once cited as problems with the Christian religion, when you read these difficult passages in the Old Testament that seem to be condoning all kinds of things, slavery and genocide, when you look in the New Testament at Paul's assessment of the position of women, the kind of thing that an atheist looks at and says, this is why Christianity, whether it's true or false, is definitely evil. Outside of the sort of effect of the Christian religion, in other words, the doctrine itself, when you come across these verses, how does Christian Ayaan deal with that and react to that differently to how atheist Ayaan would have done?
So atheist Ayaan would have come with that fortified closed mind of what I'm reading is just an old text written by people who are afraid of the world and afraid of the dark, and all the other stereotypes. And then new Ayaan, having now really seen the key differences between different religions, is now curious. I come to it with great curiosity, with, yes, so if these things are in the Old Testament, then what? And then what you see is this evolution, not just in the text itself, but also the adherence to the text. You see, and I find quite fascinating, the enormous fights that people had within churches, and what is the interpretation of this verse, of that gospel, of this chapter, or what was Jesus trying to say? And the constant battle with the human condition, the recognition that is trying to understand the human condition, maybe what's called a sin in the Bible is what in modern day life we call impulses and urges and character defects, whatever you want to call them. But the product then is an incredible, really wealthy output of wisdom. And again, even if you don't believe in God, or you refuse to believe in God because you can't see it, it would be such a pity not to partake of this wisdom, not to consider it. I'll give you one example. In the years that I was in therapy, I would see, there was all of these rational conclusions to this is how you respond to a certain situation. I was diagnosed with PTSD. Part of it was because Theo van Gogh was murdered and my non-response to my trying to shut off that experience, but also a lot of what went on in my childhood and trying to shut that off. And the advice you get through the books and the study based on studies of the human condition, the conclusions they reach and the advice they give now is plainly in the Bible and it's for free. And so there's a great deal of, wow.
What is it that you find in the Bible that you would also find as a result of that kind of therapy?
One thing that therapists insist on when you come from a very damaged background in childhood like I did is this lack of being loved and the fear of abandonment and rejection. And now reading the message of Jesus, it's this abundant love. God gave you life and he loves you and his life is unconditional, it's an infinite. I think, is it John 12? And when I read that now, part of me thinks again, processing this with a number of other patients or a number of other broken people, I think, you guys, you got this for free. I mean, it's like, it's in your culture. You could have just gone to church. You could have talked to you. You don't need to be in this, institution to come to this conclusion. Because when I was growing up, my idea of God was not a God who loved you unconditionally and infinitely. It was a God who gave you a little manual of halals and harams. This is what's right and that's what's wrong. And veering away from what's right and doing what's wrong, which is the human condition. Again, your impulses, your urges, is very rebellious. So you would be punished, and many times over on earth and in the hereafter. And that's only strengthened the feelings of self-hatred and self-loathing and shame and terror. So you live in this constant state of terror, and life becomes unbearable. So there's some of those things, and when I tell you I'm going to try and answer some of these questions in more detail in the book, this is just a small foretaste of it, is you have inherited a culture and a religious tradition that is much more suited to understanding and to empowering and enriching the human condition with all its frailties, with all its brokenness, than the ones that millions and millions of other people are born into. And you can see why, even though on a personal level, yes, I find I'm at peace with it. I'm really, really happy. But then you look up and you look at the world and everything you see around you are all these challenges, and you just want to say, it's really not that difficult. We've made it difficult. And it's not you don't have to choose between faith and reason. You can have both of them. And in fact, I find Christianity a religion of reason, much more about reason than anything else.
I want to ask you about the cultural impact of the Christian worldview, but I do also want to really press this idea that those problems that you identified in the Christian religion will still exist. Richard Dawkins, for example, thinks that the most evil idea of the New Testament is the idea that everyone is born in sin, the idea that there needs to be a human sacrifice in order to atone us when God presumably could have just forgiven us anyway. And he sees this as grotesque. And this isn't the Crusades or the Inquisition. This isn't something that the Christian church has done. This is something that's baked into the Christian religion. And I don't know if you would have said 10 years ago that you also thought that was an evil idea, but that idea is still there, still just as obvious and important as it was 10 years ago. When someone like Richard says, this is evil, this is a bad thing to be teaching children, that they're born in sin and that they cannot be good without the help of a God who threatens them with eternal punishment if they refuse to love him or even just fail to believe in him. What do you make of those criticisms now?
So I'd say some of the complex layers of that I would leave to people who are much more, I'd say, more immersed theologians who can make the point for them. But again, I go back to this human condition thing, and we have free will. I know that I'm capable of good. I know that I'm capable of evil and bad stuff. And here is a God, at least in the Christian God as I see it, who says, you are free to do as you wish. Here are the laws. Here's what it means to be a good person. And you choose what you want to do about that. And if I make terrible choices, I'm forgiven over and over and over again. And I think that recognition that good and evil are in us and that we have the free will to choose, that's a much more powerful message than if you had human beings who are then, because again, that begs Richard's question, Richard's opposition, then begs the question, are we robots then? I mean, we're now in this era of AI. We could have been designed as just doing the right thing, and then not being moral beings. And I mean, I think we don't want 7 billion robots. What would even the point be?
Yeah, well, people are made very uncomfortable with the idea that we don't have agency, that we're not in control in this way. But that was the big criticism that Christopher Hitchens made in the other direction. He said that God is a celestial dictator. God is somebody who is constantly surveilling you and watching you while you sleep and convicting you of thought crime and punishing you for even disobedience in your own mind. Presumably that's not the relationship you feel that you have with God. I
think he read more of the Quran than the New Testament.
I did wonder, one of the things I wanted to ask you is, if you could sit down with Christopher Hitchens today or go back in time and speak to him, what would you say to him? What do you think he was missing? I think we would
tour the universities together in America, and we would look at what's happening to young people today. And we would look at the effect of saying what it is that they're seeking and they're opening themselves up to. And here I referenced Bertrand Russell when he wrote the essay, Why I Am Not a Christian, where he then really goes on to say, if Christianity were to disappear, we would have, reason would overtake, and we would be would have so much progress and so much humanity and so much reason. And then now we actually have the empirical reality where Christianity is waning, and what we are getting in the highest temples of learning, the temples of reason, is not reason. It's unreason. And I would want to have a conversation with Christopher Hitchens. And when I brought this up with Richard Dawkins, he did acknowledge it, and he finds it frustrating. And I understand why he's frustrated. But I think we have to go back to this idea of, as human beings, we're much, much more complex than just the material. The atheist assertion, we're insignificant, we are nothing. I forget what Richard used to say about, we are so, he said, I forget the exact quote, but it amounts to...
blind, pitiless indifference.
Yes, and we're no more... What was it? We have no more significance than some kind of organism.
Right.
And that's just not true.
Mm.
And anyway, I also want to point out in this reading journey that I have taken on, that there are more and more people, the more we discover about the universe and the more we discover about the world, there are more and more scientists, especially on the hard science part, who are saying there is something rather than nothing. And I think that's sort of the conversation I would have with Christopher Hitchens. The problem of the activism, the evangelizing of atheism, I think that creates a barrier that robs one of curiosity. If you just shed that and you come, and you shake that off and you think, I'm open to change my mind, then, you could change your mind. You could see things that you wouldn't see when you say, I don't want to see it at all. Mm. In other words, the accusation they level against people of faith is also true for them. They really do believe in being atheists, in not believing in God. Mm. And so that is why the whole conversation about within the Christian West ended with let's agree to disagree, until the world came into the West, until Islam came and other forces came in, and that is why it's reopened.
Mm. Well, the idea is that everybody worships something. Everybody has their dogmas. Everybody has things that they believe essentially without evidence. And the atheist message was always, we're people who analyze these questions. We're people who plug in those gaps in our knowledge. And if we can't justify something, we're not going to believe it. And with that, they levy this closed-minded accusation against the religious. And I guess there's one thing to say that they do it as well. Do you think that they do it more so?
If you read the works of the apologetics, it's really this whole exercise in trying to grapple with that, where they say we're not believing in something just because we believe in it, and we're sticking to this really very serious attempts at trying to understand, to explain, and there's a great deal of doubt and self-doubt. So I think it is really on the other side where there is this certainty that there is nothing, and then trying to get everyone to come to the belief that there is nothing. And I'm not saying this is true for every atheist.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a caricature to say that Christians they all just believe without evidence and without thinking. It's like, oh, have you read the apologetics? Have you read the gallons of ink spilled over debating and trying to justify positions? Now, of course, atheists will say that, well, we do that too, and we do it better. But you're someone who's been on both sides of that. And I think when atheists say, oh, Christians, they just believe it because their parents told them to, they're thinking of like their uncle at Thanksgiving. Yeah, they're not thinking of the William Lane Craigs or the Alexander Pruses of the world. They're thinking of someone that they know personally. But similarly, I know more atheists who are just atheists because, I've never seen any evidence, whatever, haven't given it much thought, than I know atheists who've sort of reasoned their way into that conclusion. I think it happens on both sides, in other words, but you're someone who's now lived both of those sides and interacted with both of those sides. And you said a second ago that you feel like it comes... more closed-mindedness comes from the atheist side than the Christian side.
More closed-mindedness comes from the atheist side, and more certainty. Again, not for every atheist, but definitely if you take atheism and you turn it into an activist position, because then you're selling something. And that's what is, it's blinding, isn't it? You become so confident. And I think even a little more than confidence, there's an element of arrogance. And this is it. There's really nothing more to know or learn or find out. We have it. There's nothing.
People say that that's what the Christians say. They say, I have my answer in this book, and I'm a humble Christian who has the answer to the biggest question of the universe and knows the truth, and there's no need for further inquiry because we have the scripture. It tells us the way things are.
I'm sure that's the case. I'm sure that's the case for a lot of Christians. And I have to tell you, on a personal level, it is wonderful to have the answer, to have this relationship with God, a God who's loving and whom I talk to and pray to and feel a sense of peace. But then on a more intellectual level, when you take the position, there is something. I think you are then much more involved mentally in proving or even finding out. The curiosity is very high. It's finding out, well, if there's something, what is it then? And where can I find it? So I think that opens up just a whole lot more in terms of learning and reading and finding out. And, in the time that I became a Christian, I've also been approached by people saying, hang on, there is something, but it's not necessarily Christianity. It's something else. There is an energy, and people are giving it all sorts of names. But that's, I think that stance, that mental stance, it provides for more curiosity than the position where there's nothing, I can't be bothered. Or I can only be bothered to tell other people that there is nothing.
You said before, I choose to believe. It sounded to me as if you'd been convinced by your personal experience that there's something, and Christianity resonated with you on like a moral level or on an existential level, then faced with this worldview that comes packaged along with it, that there was a man who was born of a virgin and died on a cross and exited a tomb, that you choose to believe that. A lot of people will look at that not so much with criticism, but with astonishment. I mean, my listeners know that I'm somebody who would love to be a Christian. I'd love for it to be true. How do you choose to believe in something?
Well, I think I probably chose with my feet to begin with, because I came for certain things when I came to the West, and I wanted to be seen as a human being. I wanted to make choices. I didn't want to be forced into a marriage that I didn't want to be in. I wanted to tell the truth. I came from an environment ruled by fear and terror. So you lie to survive. You're always dishonest. You're always hiding what you want, what you really want, because you're worried about the punishments. I wanted to be honest and lead an honest, transparent life, a life of integrity. I wanted to have real, true, fulfilling friendships and relationships. And so as I see, these are my values. And then on a political level, political freedom, which is institutions that seek to ensure that you can have this life of freedom and prosperity and so on. And so honestly, it is, and this is the thing why I said Richard Dawkins is a Christian, he just doesn't know it, is we're all living according to this morality that we inherited from Christianity, Christ's teachings. We would go all over the place telling Muslims, let's separate politics from religion. And, with the stoning and all that, we would say, if you cast the first stone if you have no sin. All of these things, I was living according to these values. All I've done really is find the humility to come and accept the source. And I've been very fortunate in doing that. And I'd say my personal suffering has brought me to a place where I've now got this consistency, and I don't live in the dissonance of thinking these are the values that I hold, but Christianity is false. Or Christianity is just like Islam.
That feels like a different thing. Like there's the moral Christianity, and I'm suspicious of the idea that all of my moral intuitions are a result of Christianity. But suppose that were the case. The reason why I couldn't call myself a Christian is because I don't believe it's true. And to say I choose to believe something, it almost fills me with hope, as if maybe that's something I can do one day. But it's such an extraordinary claim. The physical resurrection of Jesus, or things like the virgin birth that Richard likes to talk about. It's as if you asked me to believe that glass of water on the table was actually made out of spaghetti, just with the appearance of glass. It's this extraordinary claim that I could try to choose to believe it, but if I'm just not convinced, I don't know how I can assent to that proposition, even if it turned out that believing that made my life better and it was more in line with how I was behaving and all of this kind of stuff. I believe that glass is made out of glass and not spaghetti. And if you ask me to just choose to believe a factual statement that I found so extraordinary, it wouldn't just be that I didn't want to, it'd be that I couldn't. So there's that moral element, which maybe everybody's already living by, and they're already basically nominal Christians in that respect. But when it comes to the truth claims, is that something that you can just choose to think is true?
Well, of course, I prayed, and like I said, in praying, I felt a change. I felt an energy. I felt a sense of calm and peace. And I didn't leave it at praying. I pray, and again, I feel these changes. I wish I could share them with you. But then I also went on to read, and when I read the Gospels, I know I can't, the stories that are told, again, these are first century accounts of things that were happening, and I'm using my 21st century brain to digest it and to understand it. But if we say miracles are really extraordinary things, because if they happened all the time, they wouldn't be miracles, then I choose to believe, and I choose with the force that I feel, the calm, the peace, the stories. I see a great deal of consistency. And then on top of that, it's watching, and for me, this is an empirical testament, is the communities, the societies that build their lives on that faith and live by those laws tend to be happier, more prosperous, more connected. And look, I've only been a Christian for 2 years, less than 2 years. So,
but to clear up for those who are familiar with your piece on Unheard and hear your personal story, you do believe in those truth claims, in the resurrection of Jesus.
I totally choose to believe in the resurrection, and also the story itself and what it tells us. A God who died for our sins so that we are forgiven, so that we can live. And I think it's extraordinary. It's such a beautiful and amazing story. I've got the chills talking about it. And so I think our human mind is more than just, show me the hard physical proof, and if I don't see that, it's not there. It's like the way you would appreciate poetry or great works of art, great music. You feel something really strong. It's there. You just can't quantify it, and you can't show any material evidence for it, but it's there. And so for me, these first century accounts are, yeah, they're true. I wasn't there to witness it myself. Again, if you read some of the works on is there something rather than nothing, and more people very skeptical of the Bible, very skeptical of religion in general, they're sort of tilting towards there is something. And I'm reading on, I'm finding on. But like what I have now is really special, and I wish I could share it with you.
Has anything in particular jumped out at you? Has anything surprised you when reading the Gospels, for example? Anything you didn't expect to sort of leap off the page at you?
I can only repeat this great insight into the human condition that leaps out at me, because of course I got my introduction into psychology. I had my sister when I was 26, 27 years old. My sister had some psychotic episodes. She was only a year and a half younger than me. And I plunged into reading works of psychiatry that were produced, the DSM books. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, what a discovery that was, because I had never viewed madness, is what I call it in Somali. It's just you don't have many different words for it. You have colloquial words like crazy, mad. Mm-hmm. You don't call it psychiatric conditions. You don't have a word for psychosis. You don't have a word for the different types of psychotic episodes that one can have. So I dived into those books, and now diving into the Bible and into the Gospels and into the commentary, what jumps out at me is that this stuff was known 2,000 years ago, and it evolved, and we continue to evolve, and we continue to build on that. And so that makes it, for me, feel even more true than having to witness the miracle itself.
We're filming this on the day of the presidential election in America.
Yeah.
You've made no secret of the fact that you prefer one candidate over the other. Do you think that would have been true for atheist Ayaan as well?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Again, I don't even see this election as a contest between Republicans and Democrats. I see it as a contest between people within the Democratic Party. So we have two major parties in the US. One of them is the Republican Party, one of them is the Democratic Party. And within the Democratic Party, this force of far leftist lunatics have completely hijacked the party. And they have, for whatever reason, they seem to have cowed the moderates. And when I talk about moderates, I'm thinking of, the Bill Clinton types of, the proposition that center left, which is, sure, we need a little bit of government in more things to mitigate for the things that people are not doing themselves economically and for the weak and so on. But, we need a sensible border policy. We need to balance the budget. We need for our schools to be good Democrats who are moderate, who are completely committed to upholding the American Constitution. These moderate Democrats have been cowed, and this far left group have come in with ideas that are revolutionary, that they couldn't win up until 1989. Marxism was something people believed in, and then it collapsed. But that was the economic argument. And now they have these cultural arguments with identity politics, racializing everything, bringing in gender fluidity and other crazy ideas, maiming children, literally removing healthy body parts from children. And that's then across the board in blue states, developing these laws that make it possible and legal to do something like that. I live in the state of California. It's just madness. And then and the moderates just within the Democratic Party don't seem to be able to push these people back into the fringe. And so atheist me would have seen the exact same things and been angry at the exact same things and said, what we need, this party is hijacked, it's subverted, and we need to push back against these people. It's not coming from within the Democratic Party. So naturally speaking, the way we have our system, you have the other party, the Republican Party, and now you see this realignment. So the rational Democrats are fleeing. It was the blue-collar workers in 2016, all the way to Silicon Valley. The tech brothers are now going for Republicans. So there's this complete realignment of what used to be the Republican Party, somewhere in between. Either they remain Republican or they are independents, or some of them have moved over to the Democratic Party. But generally speaking, it's a huge number of frustrated constituents of the Democratic Party who are going that way. And that's what we're seeing. And I think that's a good thing. I think the Democratic Party should lose. I think they should lose big, and they should have showdown amongst themselves and hopefully save the party and kick these people out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm intrigued to know what you think of Donald Trump as more than just a response to and punishment of the Democratic Party. We've just been talking about humility.
Yeah.
We've been talking about subtlety, not speaking on things that we don't know about and leaving it to the experts. These are not the kind of values which I see embodied in a man like Donald Trump. And so when you come out in fervent support of a political candidate like him, married to everything that you've told me so far on this podcast, is there something about Trump that you like, or is it really just an attempt to punish the Democrats?
So I know Donald Trump just like you from publicity. I haven't met him, but the way he was portrayed in 2016, in the lead up to 2016, by the media, led me to vote for Hillary Clinton, even though I saw some of the problems. But I thought, no, I can't trust this man. First of all, he's never been in politics, but everything that was said about him just meant it was scary. And then he came into government and he governed. And his administration, up until 2019, before the pandemic hit, the policies were just fine. I'm hugely impressed by something like the Abraham Accords, hugely impressed by the way the economy was humming along. Yeah, he was holding a sideshow where he was saying things that were, sometimes entertaining, sometimes crazy, and sometimes I think also designed to provoke the media and the left, but keep himself, draw all attention to himself. And, I wish he spoke like King Charles all the time, but that's not Donald Trump. That's not him, and now we're used to the fact that he doesn't do that. But what you then saw, what alarmed me more than whatever was coming out of his mouth, was what the other side was actually doing. And that was to to cast him as this villain, calling him Hitler and demonic stuff, and then giving themselves permission to use the system, weaponize the courts, the justice system, the media even, to do all the things that we all abhor and find undemocratic. And so I really blame the other side and say, if it is upholding the Constitution, his actions are consistent with upholding the Constitution. He's campaigning on let's bring back common sense. He's campaigning on making America great again, on with Elon Musk bringing down the costs, this runaway cost. All this mischief is possible because it's paid for with taxpayer money without accountability. And he's saying, I'm going to bring accountability back. I think given what we have seen in the last 4 years, I'm very much betting on him and his team is superior. I mean, I look at J.D. Vance, I look at Elon Musk, I look at some of the other people who are supporting him, and I think I would rather bet on this ticket to bring us back to what America is about, rather than this ticket of Kamala Harris, who she can't say what she stands for. She did previously, and then she's confronted with it. She flip-flops, and now she's in this state of, I won't tell you. And I grew up in a middle class family. Word salad this and word salad that, and that's not going to cut it, because politics, elections have consequences. And in the last 16 years, 12 of the last 16 years were Democrats. 8 years of Obama, followed by 4 years, Trump, and then 4 years of Biden and Harris. And this large to the far left is just wrong. It is the wearing or the hollowing out of the national identity, and more investing in global issues and globalizing America. And that just won't work, because that waters down the Constitution to something unrecognizable.
Some of those things that Donald Trump wants to do, one of the most important is immigration. Immigration policy is a top issue for many voters, and it sounds very important to you. And you mentioned a moment ago about sensible immigration policies. The idea of stricter immigration is, I know, something that you're in favor of. I'm interested in how you square that with the Christian message that you've come to believe in. When you read passages about Jesus being essentially universal in his love, non-picky, himself born in an unknown land, himself a foreigner, himself an outsider, somebody who teaches you that the Samaritan is your brother because he's the one that looked after you, not because he's part of your nation or your tribe. Reading those stories, I find it very difficult to square the idea of Christian nationalism, the idea of being a Christian and yet believing that there should be a choice that's made about who we sort of give our resources to, who we allow into the country, who we don't. Now, I think it's very sensible to do that too, but maybe that's part of the reason why I'm not a Christian. But I wonder how you put those two together.
I think one thing that Jesus Christ would oppose would be the commodification of the human being. And what we are now calling immigration is not immigration. It's deceiving poor people in poor countries into thinking that they're going to rich countries where they're welcome and they're going to have jobs and they're going to have shelter and healthcare and that they can send money back to. And that's not what happens. What happens is the people who are deceived to sell whatever they have and raise whatever little money that they can, give that money to smugglers, people smugglers, and that are then exploited and taken advantage of. There's a reason why almost 75% of the people who make it through these borders are male, because women and children, by the way, find themselves just in greater suffering than where they came from. You're scooping away the middle classes of these poorer countries, and their money is going to smugglers, and then they are exploited. They're raped. They're used in prostitution syndicates. They come out cheated, and then they come to societies where they're left with no identity. They are told, you can't work here, you're not welcome here. They meet with various forms of rejection. I'm not going to use the word racism because it's been overused, but I'm sure that there's also some racism. And so it would be Jesus would be against any form of dishonesty. And I think what we are seeing now is this cabal of moving human beings from one side to the other. And I just think that's not going to work in the host societies. It's causing a lot, the breakdown of social cohesion. You're British. Look at what this, I call it mindless migration, has done to Britain, but also France, the Netherlands, Germany. There's a great deal of turmoil caused in the host societies. And so I think that to be very honest, we can have immigration systems that are a win-win, that work for the immigrant and that work for the host society. But it's not what we have now. What we have now is an abuse of the asylum system. There are large numbers of people who think that by coming to the West, they're going to have they'll have jobs and better incomes. These are people seeking to improve their economic well-being, but they're only using the asylum system. So I would say the first proposal I would make is for Western countries to withdraw from the Geneva Convention and just shut down the asylum systems and then develop their own national asylum laws so that they can choose who they want to take as asylum seekers, which would always be a really tiny number, and then develop an economic immigration policy that, again, is a win-win for the people who are coming and the people who are here.
A final question for you. I asked you earlier what you might have said to Christopher Hitchens, if you could go back in time or bring him here today. I've asked you what you would say to my atheist listeners or to other Christians. Just on a personal level, if you could go back in time and speak to atheist Ayaan, what would Christian Ayaan say to atheist Ayaan 10 years ago?
Christianity is radically different from Islam. Christianity is unique. Everything I love and care about Western society and Western civilization is a product of Christianity. And I would have then said to Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, all of my atheist friends, how do you square this? Why would you be throwing the baby out with the bathwater? Is there nothing you want to retain?
The baby out with the holy water.
With the holy water, yeah. Yeah. And I think I would have also I would have paid more attention to the Christian apologists at the time who were debating all of these things. And, I owe them a huge apology. And I think a lot of us owe them a huge apology.
Well, Ayaan, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your story. As you say, this is a work in progress, and there'll be a book at some point when it's ready, detailing more of what brought you to faith. But I appreciate that it's still somewhat up in the air. You're still learning, and so I appreciate all the more that you're.
Yeah, I hope I'll bring sort of more concise answers and more well thought through answers than at this stage of discovery where I am in now.
I think there's something wonderful about capturing that moment. I mean, it will be great once you have a thought out theology and you've picked your denomination and you're condemning everyone else as a heretic or whatever it is that you might do in the future. For now, this moment where it seems like it's maybe the wrong time to speak because you're still working it all out, there's something about capturing that moment that I think is so beautiful and also probably helpful to people in a similar circumstance. So I'm sure they're appreciative as I am for you taking the time to do this.
Yeah, thank you.
Watch my episode with Richard Dawkins by clicking the link on your screen. To support the show and get early access ad-free to episodes, subscribe to my Substack at alexoconnor.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.